A coach cut off a black boy's dreadlocks in front of the entire team, humiliating him in front of everyone. But he soon realized whose son he was humiliating, and it had unexpected consequences. Subscribe and post in the comments where you're watching from. The day dawned gray and overcast as 12-year-old Jamal tugged his backpack strap tighter across his shoulder, standing outside his new school for the first time. The building loomed before him, an unfamiliar maze of brick and windows stretching in every direction. He swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the moment press down on him, both excited and anxious about what lay ahead. Only a month ago, Jamal and his mom had packed up their lives in the bustling city to move to this quiet town. She had accepted a job offer she couldn't turn down, and Jamal's dad had promised to join them later, but for now, it was just him and his mom in a place where they didn't know a single soul. His dad, a prominent figure back in their hometown, was heavily involved in activism and often spoke out for the rights of marginalized communities. Jamal was proud of his dad's work and shared many of his values, but right now he wasn't thinking about that. He just wanted to fit in, to blend into this new school without causing any ripples. Jamal took a deep breath, checking his reflection in the school's glass doors. His face looked back at him, a mix of determination and nervousness, framed by the neat rows of braids that he had chosen to keep, even here. Those braids were a part of his identity, his culture, and he was proud of them. But now he wondered if they would make him stand out too much. His mom had encouraged him that morning, saying, "Don't let anyone make you feel like you have to change yourself to fit in, Jamal. Be who you are. Those who matter will see you for who you are inside." He smiled a little at the thought, repeating her words to himself as he pushed open the doors and stepped inside. The hallways buzzed with noise, kids hurrying to their lockers, some whispering to friends, others tapping on their phones. Jamal felt a few eyes on him, lingering stares that prickled his skin, making him acutely aware of every step he took. He kept his eyes forward, pretending he didn't notice, but he could hear the whispers. "Who's the new kid? Why does his hair look like that?" Ignoring the comments, he found his way to his first class. The teacher, Mrs. Carter, looked up as he entered, her smile tight and perfunctory. She scanned him from head to toe, her gaze lingering a beat too long on his braids, before gesturing to an empty seat near the back. Jamal sat down, the curious stares of his classmates pressing down on him, his mind racing with thoughts of what they were thinking, but he kept his head up. As the teacher droned on, Jamal's mind drifted, wondering how long it would take before he felt like he belonged here. Back home, his school had been a diverse mix of kids from all backgrounds, where braids, afros, and a variety of cultures blended together naturally. Here, he felt like a single stark brushstroke on a blank canvas. At lunch, he hesitated before heading to the cafeteria, wondering if he'd end up sitting alone. Fortunately, he spotted two kids who seemed friendly, a girl with a bright smile named Leah and a boy with glasses named Carl. They were chatting at a table by the window, and Leah waved him over as soon as she noticed him looking around. "Hey, new kid, come sit with us," she called out, patting the seat next to her. Relieved, Jamal slid into the seat and gave them a shy smile. They chatted easily, with Leah and Carl asking him questions about his old school, his hobbies, and his interests. They seemed genuinely interested in him, and Jamal felt a spark of hope that maybe he could find a place for himself here. But their conversation was interrupted when a group of kids at a nearby table snickered, pointing at Jamal's braids and muttering something to each other. One of them, a tall boy with a sneer on his face, spoke loud enough for Jamal to hear. "What's with the braids? Looks like he's trying to get attention," the boy sneered. Jamal clenched his fists under the table, a flush of embarrassment rising to his cheeks. Leah shot a glare at the boy, but tried to diffuse the tension by turning back to Jamal. "Don't mind them," she whispered. "They're just ignorant." Jamal nodded, but the comment gnawed at him. It wasn't the first time he'd heard things like that since he arrived. By the end of the day, he was exhausted, his nerves frayed from the constant stares and whispers. But he refused to let it show. He wouldn't let them make him feel ashamed of who he was. That night, he lay in bed, his thoughts racing. He missed the comfort of his old school, his friends who accepted him without question, and the teachers who didn't make assumptions based on his appearance. He wondered how long he'd be able to hold out before the subtle jabs and looks chipped away at his confidence. The next morning, Jamal steeled himself for another day. His mom wished him well, offering her usual encouraging smile. He nodded, pushing aside the feelings of doubt and insecurity that had haunted him all night. Today would be better, he told himself. Today, he'd find a way to fit in, no matter what. As he walked into his homeroom, the teacher introduced him to the class again, as if to reinforce his new kid status. He felt all eyes on him as he took his seat, but this time he focused on ignoring it, looking straight ahead. Yet the tension in the air was undeniable. Every hallway, every glance, every whispered comment felt like a reminder that he was different. Then came gym class, and with it, his introduction to Coach Harris. The coach was an imposing figure, tall and broad-shouldered, with a reputation for being strict and unyielding. As Jamal joined the other students, Coach Harris looked him over with a critical eye, his gaze immediately landing on Jamal's braids. Jamal sensed the judgment in his expression, a mixture of disapproval and suspicion. "All right, listen up," Coach Harris barked. "Here in my class, we follow strict rules and maintain a certain standard. That includes how you present yourselves." His words hung in the air, directed more at Jamal than anyone else. Jamal felt a twist of anxiety in his stomach, but he tried to keep his face neutral. "Tomorrow," the coach continued, his gaze still fixed on Jamal, "I expect everyone to come looking professional and ready. No distractions, understood?" Jamal nodded along with the rest of the class, but he knew that distractions meant his hair. A part of him wanted to speak up, to challenge the implication that his culture was something unprofessional or inappropriate. But he held back, unsure of the reaction he'd get. After gym, Leah and Carl caught up with him in the hall, noticing the tension on his face. "Don't let him get to you," Leah said, her voice gentle but firm. "Coach Harris has a reputation. He's hard on everyone." Jamal tried to believe her words, but deep down he knew it was more than that. The stares, the whispers, the judgmental looks, they weren't directed at everyone. They were directed at him. And he didn't know how long he could keep pretending it didn't bother him. As the day ended, Jamal walked home, replaying the events in his mind, wrestling with a mixture of anger, frustration, and sadness. He didn't want to change, didn't want to abandon something that was so much a part of him, yet he could feel the pressure building, an unspoken demand to conform. That night, as he lay awake in bed, his mom's words echoed in his mind. Don't let anyone make you feel like you have to change yourself to fit in. He held on to that thought, letting it soothe the unease he felt, hoping that somehow he could find the strength to stay true to himself in a place that seemed determined to make him doubt. The second day of school was only slightly easier for Jamal. He walked into the building with a renewed sense of determination, but felt the same stares as he passed through the crowded hallways. He ignored them, repeating his mom's words in his mind like a mantra, finding comfort in the reminder to stay true to himself. Still, he knew it would be a tough day. After all, today would bring his first real practice with the school's basketball team. Basketball had always been his escape, his joy. Back in his old school, it was on the court where he felt most himself, where he could lose himself in the rhythm of the game. He'd been looking forward to joining the team here, hoping that maybe, once he started playing, the other students would see him for who he really was and not just as the new kid with braids. By the time practice rolled around that afternoon, Jamal was ready. He arrived early to the gym, tying up his sneakers, warming up with a few easy shots to loosen his muscles. A few of his teammates arrived and started chatting quietly among themselves, throwing glances his way now and then. Jamal noticed but tried not to dwell on it. Maybe, he thought, this was just how things were with new teammates. Maybe they'd warm up to him once he proved himself on the court. Then Coach Harris entered the gym. Coach Harris had an aura that demanded attention. He was tall and powerfully built, with a gruff expression and a voice that could easily command a room. His reputation for being strict and old school had preceded him, and even before Jamal had met him, he'd heard whispers from his classmates about Coach's no-nonsense approach. As soon as the coach's eyes landed on Jamal, the temperature in the room seemed to drop a few degrees. Jamal could feel Coach Harris's gaze lingering, scrutinizing him from head to toe before settling on his braids. A faint, almost imperceptible scowl crossed the coach's face, but it was enough to make Jamal tense up. "All right, everyone," Coach Harris barked, clapping his hands together. "Let's get started. Today's practice is all about discipline. We don't mess around on my court. If you're here to work hard, to prove yourself. I don't tolerate slackers or distractions." He paused, his gaze fixed on Jamal as if the word distractions had been meant solely for him. Jamal shifted uncomfortably, but kept his face impassive, determined not to show any sign of intimidation. As practice began, Jamal focused on the drills, pouring all his energy into each sprint, each layup, each pass. He wanted to show Coach Harris and his teammates that he was serious, that he was there to give his best. And for a while, he managed to tune everything else out, letting the rhythm of the game take over. But no matter how hard he tried, it seemed that Coach Harris was watching him more critically than anyone else. Every missed shot, every slight hesitation was met with a barked correction or a pointed comment. "Focus, Jamal. You think those fancy braids are going to help you make that shot?" Coach Harris shouted after one particularly difficult drill. Some of the other boys snickered, and Jamal felt a flush of anger but kept it in check. He wasn't about to let the coach get a reaction out of him. As practice went on, Coach Harris's comments became more frequent, more biting. Every little mistake Jamal made seemed to trigger another harsh remark, as if Coach was waiting for him to fail. "Are you even paying attention, or are you too busy worrying about your hair?" he snapped at one point, loud enough for the entire gym to hear. The words stung, cutting through Jamal's concentration. He could feel his teammates' eyes on him, some looking uncomfortable, others smirking. He wanted to fire back, to defend himself, but he bit his tongue, forcing himself to keep calm. Standing up to Coach Harris wouldn't do him any good, he told himself. It would only make things worse. After practice, Jamal was exhausted, not just from the physical demands, but from the emotional toll of enduring Coach's constant critiques. Leah and Carl caught up with him as he left the gym, their faces concerned. "That was rough, man," Carl said, giving him a sympathetic look. "Coach really seems to have it out for you." Jamal shrugged, trying to act nonchalant. "It's nothing. He's just strict." "Strict? More like biased," Leah muttered, crossing her arms. "I've never heard him talk to anyone else like that. It's like he's picking on you specifically." Jamal tried to brush it off, but Leah's words struck a chord. Deep down, he knew she was right. Coach Harris's tone, his choice of words, the way he seemed to single Jamal out, it wasn't just strictness. There was something else, something personal, underlying the coach's behavior. But what could he do about it? He was just a student, and Coach Harris was an authority figure, respected by the school. Standing up to him felt impossible. The next day, as Jamal prepared for practice, he steeled himself, telling himself that he wouldn't let Coach Harris's comments get to him. But as soon as he entered the gym, the same pattern began. Coach's gaze zeroed in on him immediately, his expression hard and cold. The drills were tougher that day, and as the minutes dragged on, Jamal's frustration built. Coach Harris's taunts grew sharper, each one a little more pointed than the last. At one point, during a sprint drill, Jamal stumbled, catching his foot on the edge of the court. He quickly regained his balance, but Coach Harris was on him in an instant. "You think you're something special with those braids, huh?" Coach sneered, his voice low and scornful. "Well, let me tell you something, kid. On my court, you're nothing but another player. And I don't tolerate distractions." Jamal's heart pounded, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. For a split second, he considered speaking up, but the anger in Coach's eyes stopped him. He felt trapped, humiliated, knowing that no matter what he said, it wouldn't change Coach's mind. After practice, Leah and Carl were waiting for him outside, their expressions a mixture of anger and sympathy. "Jamal, you can't let him keep talking to you like that," Leah said, her voice fierce. "It's not right. He's crossing a line." Jamal sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "What can I do? He's the coach. If I say anything, he'll just make it worse." Carl frowned, glancing back toward the gym. "Maybe we could, I don't know, tell someone, like the principal or something?" Jamal shook his head. "I don't want to make a big deal out of it. I just want to play basketball, you know? I didn't ask for all this attention." Leah put a hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to do this alone, Jamal. If he keeps treating you like this, we'll figure something out. We've got your back." Their support meant a lot, but it didn't change the sinking feeling in Jamal's gut. No matter what he did, Coach Harris seemed determined to tear him down, to make him feel like he didn't belong. And Jamal didn't know how much longer he could endure it. That night, as he lay in bed, he replayed Coach Harris's words over and over, each taunt digging deeper into his mind. He wanted to ignore them, to brush them off, but they clung to him, a constant reminder that he was different, that he didn't fit the mold of what Coach Harris thought a player should be. As the days went by, Jamal tried to keep his head down, to avoid drawing any more attention, but no matter what he did, Coach Harris found a reason to criticize him. His patience wore thin, the weight of each insult pressing down on him like a physical burden. Then, during one particularly grueling practice, Coach Harris took things a step further. "All right, everyone," he announced, gathering the team around. "We're not just here to play basketball. We're here to represent this school, and that means looking professional, acting professional. I don't want to see any distractions, especially not those braids." He turned to Jamal, his eyes cold and hard. "Next practice, you come with your hair in check, or don't come at all." Jamal felt a surge of anger, a raw, hot indignation rising in his chest. He opened his mouth to argue, to defend himself, but Coach cut him off with a withering glare. "Did I make myself clear?" Jamal swallowed, the words dying on his tongue. He nodded, feeling the weight of defeat settle over him. As he left the gym, his mind swirled with frustration, resentment, and a sense of betrayal. This wasn't just about basketball anymore. This was about who he was, his identity, his pride. And for the first time he realized he might have to choose between the game he loved and staying true to himself. Jamal spent the night tossing and turning, his mind a storm of frustration, anger, and confusion. Coach Harris's words from practice echoed relentlessly in his head. "Next practice, you come with your hair in check, or don't come at all." The ultimatum weighed heavily on him. Basketball was supposed to be a place where he could escape, where he could feel like himself. But now, he was being forced to choose between the sport he loved and the identity he held dear. Each time he imagined showing up with his braids gone, a wave of resentment surged through him. His braids weren't just a style, they were a connection to his culture, his roots, and to his family, especially his dad. They were part of who he was. The next morning, Jamal decided he wouldn't let Coach Harris force him into abandoning that part of himself. His mom's words replayed in his mind. "Be who you are, Jamal. Those who matter will see you for who you are inside." He steeled himself, choosing to keep his braids. If Coach Harris had a problem with it, Jamal would deal with that when the time came. When he arrived at practice, Jamal felt his pulse quicken, his palms damp with anxiety. His teammates watched him silently as he walked into the gym, their gazes flicking between him and Coach Harris, as though they sensed the tension simmering in the air. Coach Harris was already there, clipboard in hand, but his expression soured the moment he saw Jamal. His jaw tightened, and he set down the clipboard with a deliberate, ominous calm. Jamal's heart pounded, but he forced himself to stand tall, keeping his gaze steady. "Jamal," Coach Harris said, his voice low but dripping with disdain. "Didn't I make myself clear?" "Yes, Coach," Jamal replied, his voice steady, though he could feel his stomach twisting. "But I'm not going to change who I am for practice. My hair doesn't affect how I play." The room went silent, the other players frozen, watching the exchange with wide eyes. No one had ever dared to speak back to Coach Harris, not like this. Coach's face flushed with anger, his eyes narrowing as he took a step closer to Jamal, towering over him. "You think you're above the rules, huh? You think you're some kind of exception?" His voice rose, echoing through the gym. "I've seen your type before, thinking you can do whatever you want and get away with it." Jamal's fists clenched at his sides, the unfairness of the accusation sparking an anger he could barely contain. "I'm not trying to be an exception," he replied, his voice tight. "I'm just trying to be myself." Coach Harris sneered. "Yourself? I don't care who you think you are. In my gym, you follow my rules." Without another word, he reached out, his hand closing around one of Jamal's braids. Jamal's heart dropped as he realized what was happening. But before he could react, Coach Harris pulled out a small pair of scissors from his pocket, an almost predatory gleam in his eyes. In one swift, brutal motion, he cut through the braid, letting the severed hair fall to the floor. A collective gasp went through the room. Jamal felt a shock wave of humiliation, rage, and disbelief crash over him. His body froze as Coach Harris moved to the next braid, ignoring Jamal's stunned expression, his hand moving with cold, calculated precision. "Stop!" Jamal shouted, pulling back, but Coach Harris gripped his shoulder firmly, holding him in place. "You'll thank me for this one day," the coach muttered, almost to himself. "One day you'll understand the importance of discipline, of not standing out." Jamal's vision blurred, his cheeks hot with shame as each braid fell to the ground, a painful, physical symbol of his helplessness. He felt his voice failing him, the sting of tears burning his eyes, but he fought to keep them back, refusing to let Coach Harris see his pain. When the last braid was severed, Coach stepped back, inspecting Jamal with a smug satisfaction. "There. Now you look like you belong," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Maybe now you'll focus on your game instead of on getting attention." Jamal couldn't hold back any longer. He turned on his heel and ran from the gym, ignoring the startled expressions of his teammates, the whispers that followed him. He didn't care where he was going. He just needed to get away, away from the gym, away from the stairs, away from Coach Harris. He ran through the school hallways, out the main doors, and around to the back of the building, where he finally collapsed on a bench, gasping for breath as tears streamed down his face. The humiliation, the anger, the utter betrayal, it was all too much. "Jamal!" He looked up through blurred vision to see Leah and Carl running toward him, their faces etched with worry. "Are you okay?" Leah asked, sitting beside him and putting a comforting hand on his shoulder. "We saw what happened. That was so wrong, Jamal. He can't do that." Jamal wiped his face, his voice breaking as he tried to speak. I didn't think he'd actually do it." "He's a monster," Carl muttered, clenching his fists. "There's no way he should get away with this." Jamal looked down at the ground, the weight of his humiliation and helplessness pressing down on him like a physical force. "But what can I do? He's the coach. I'm just a student." Leah's eyes blazed with anger. "No, Jamal, this isn't just about basketball anymore. What he did was wrong, and he needs to be held accountable. We can't let him get away with this." Jamal wanted to believe her, wanted to believe that there was something he could do, but the defeat settled heavily in his chest. "Even if I try to tell someone, who's going to believe me over him? Everyone respects Coach Harris. They'll just say I'm exaggerating or trying to cause trouble." Carl shook his head. "Not if we all stand together. There are other students who saw what he did, and we're here for you, Jamal. You don't have to face this alone." Jamal looked at his friends, a flicker of hope stirring within him. Their support meant everything, but the thought of standing up to Coach Harris still filled him with dread. Yet, he knew he couldn't just ignore what had happened. If he didn't speak out, Coach would only continue treating others this way, bullying them into submission. Leah put a hand on his shoulder, squeezing it gently. "You're stronger than he thinks, Jamal. Don't let him take that away from you." With their encouragement, Jamal felt a new resolve take root. He wasn't sure how he would do it, but he knew he couldn't stay silent. Coach Harris had crossed a line, and even if it scared him, Jamal knew he had to take a stand. Jamal spent the night in a haze of emotions, his mind whirling between anger, shame, and a bitter sense of helplessness. He could still feel the sharp, humiliating snips as Coach Harris severed his braids, each cut feeling like a personal attack, a forced attempt to erase a piece of his identity. He hadn't told his mom what happened, too numb and exhausted to even find the words. But when morning came, he knew he couldn't keep this to himself any longer. After a restless night, Jamal decided to call his father. His dad, a fierce advocate for minority rights and a well-known community figure back in their old city, had always taught Jamal the importance of standing up against injustice. Though Jamal had been trying to fit in quietly, the humiliation from Coach Harris made him realize that staying silent wasn't an option anymore. Jamal sat on the edge of his bed, phone pressed to his ear, waiting for his dad to pick up. When he finally heard his father's voice, warm and reassuring, Jamal felt a flood of emotions overwhelm him. "Hey, Jamal, how's my boy doing?" His dad's voice was filled with the usual cheer, unaware of the turmoil in Jamal's heart. Jamal took a shaky breath. "Dad, I need to tell you something." He recounted everything that had happened, the taunts, the judgmental looks, the constant criticism, and finally, the horror of Coach Harris forcibly cutting his braids. His voice shook as he relived the memory, and he could hear his father's silence on the other end, growing heavier with each word. When Jamal finished, his father's response was low and filled with a simmering anger. "He did what?" Jamal swallowed, feeling both relief and apprehension at his father's reaction. "He said my hair was a distraction, and that I had to get rid of it to be professional. He cut it himself, right there in front of everyone." There was a long pause, and then his father spoke, his voice steady but charged with anger. "Jamal, listen to me. This is not okay. No one has a right to make you feel less than you are because of your culture, your identity. I'm not going to let this go." By the time Jamal got off the phone, his father had promised to take immediate action. Jamal wasn't sure what that would entail, but the thought of his dad stepping in gave him a spark of hope. Maybe, with his dad's influence, something would finally change. That same afternoon, his dad made a call to the school principal, demanding a meeting with the administration. The principal, initially dismissive, grew uneasy as Jamal's father explained that this was no ordinary complaint. He emphasized the cultural and racial implications of Coach Harris's actions, underscoring that this was a clear violation of Jamal's rights and an assault on his dignity. The principal, sensing the gravity of the situation, agreed to set up a meeting with the school board. But Jamal's father wasn't content with a closed-door discussion. He wanted the story to reach a wider audience. That evening, he contacted several local news outlets, detailing what had happened to Jamal. The story spread quickly, sparking outrage and support from community members who were appalled by the coach's actions. As word spread, Jamal's friends Leah and Carl decided it was time to take a stand of their own. They gathered a group of students, sharing Jamal's story and rallying support. Leah, with her fierce determination, led the effort, convincing students to join a protest in solidarity with Jamal. The next day, students arrived at school in droves, many of them wearing hairstyles that celebrated diversity, some with braids, some with afros, and others donning traditional head wraps. The halls buzzed with energy as students exchanged nods and words of encouragement. Jamal felt a lump in his throat when he saw Leah and Carl waiting for him outside his homeroom, their expressions serious but encouraging. "Today, we're going to show them that they can't silence us," Leah said firmly, giving Jamal a reassuring smile. As they walked through the hallways together, Jamal saw more students nodding in solidarity, their faces a mix of defiance and support. The school administration quickly took notice of the protest, but the students, undeterred, continued to rally. By lunchtime, a crowd had gathered in the school courtyard, holding signs with messages like, "Respect our identity," and "Our hair, our culture." The principal came out, his face tight with frustration as he tried to contain the situation. He demanded that the students disperse, but Leah stepped forward, her voice strong and unwavering. "We're here to support Jamal," she declared, looking directly at the principal. "What happened to him was wrong, and we won't let it go unnoticed." The principal hesitated, visibly taken aback by Leah's boldness. Jamal felt a swell of pride as he stood beside her, the voices of his peers chanting in unison behind them. The protest continued, drawing attention not only from the school, but from parents, local reporters, and even activists who had caught wind of the story. In the afternoon, Jamal's father arrived at the school. He strode into the principal's office, joined by a lawyer and a representative from a local civil rights organization. The principal, clearly overwhelmed, attempted to smooth things over, but Jamal's father was relentless. He demanded a formal investigation into Coach Harris's conduct and a public apology to Jamal. He emphasized that this wasn't just about a haircut. This was about the right to cultural identity and the importance of respecting diversity in educational institutions. As the meeting went on, Jamal's father presented the facts clearly and forcefully, outlining the emotional impact the incident had had on his son and the blatant disregard Coach Harris had shown for Jamal's rights. The school administration, realizing the severity of the situation and the public attention it had garnered, began to backpedal, promising to investigate and take appropriate action. Meanwhile, outside, the protest grew louder. Students shared stories of their own experiences with prejudice, their voices blending into a chorus of shared frustration and resilience. Jamal stood among them, feeling a sense of unity and strength he hadn't felt before. For the first time, he felt as though he wasn't facing this alone. By the end of the day, the principal emerged to address the crowd. He announced that the school would conduct a formal investigation into the incident, and that Coach Harris had been temporarily suspended pending the outcome. Though it wasn't a complete victory, it was a significant step forward, a sign that their voices had been heard. Jamal's heart swelled with gratitude as he looked around at his friends, his peers, and even strangers who had come to stand by him. Leah and Carl were there by his side, their expressions filled with pride and relief. "We did it," Leah whispered, smiling through tears. Jamal nodded, his own eyes glistening. The fight wasn't over yet, but for the first time since he'd come to this school, he felt like he belonged. The journey had been painful, but now, with the support of his friends, family, and community, he was ready to face whatever came next. The days that followed the protest were a whirlwind for Jamal. The story of what had happened to him continued to spread, drawing attention not only from local media but also from activists, community leaders, and concerned parents who were appalled by Coach Harris's actions. For the first time since he'd come to this town, Jamal felt like he was no longer standing alone, even if the journey had been painful and humiliating. The school administration, however, was not handling the backlash as gracefully as Jamal's father had hoped. The principal had initially promised an investigation, but days passed without any real response from the school. Students whispered about the administration's reluctance, and many suspected they were waiting for the story to fade from the headlines. But Jamal, his father, and the supportive community wouldn't allow that to happen. On the third day after the protest, Jamal's father decided to take further action. He reached out to civil rights organizations and local government representatives, making it clear that this was no longer just about his son. It was about ensuring that no other child would have to endure the same indignity. That evening, Jamal's father organized a public town hall meeting. Dozens of people turned up, including teachers, parents, community members, and even some students from Jamal's school. Jamal sat beside his father on the stage, feeling both nervous and empowered as he looked out at the crowd. His dad took the microphone, his voice steady and commanding. "Thank you all for being here tonight," he began, his gaze sweeping over the faces in the room. "My son, Jamal, came to this town hoping to find a welcoming community. Instead, he found a place where his identity was dismissed, where his heritage was disrespected, and where he was forced to question his right to simply be who he is." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the audience as Jamal's father continued, recounting the events that had led to this moment. He spoke passionately about the importance of cultural respect, about how a child's self-worth should never be compromised by the biases of others. "We are here not only to seek justice for Jamal," he said, his voice filled with conviction, "but to demand that our schools uphold values of inclusion and respect. No child should ever be humiliated, should ever be made to feel less than because of who they are." When he finished, the room erupted in applause. One by one, others came forward to speak, sharing stories of their own experiences with discrimination, both in the school and beyond. Teachers, parents, and even former students spoke up, recounting moments when they too had felt the sting of prejudice. As the town hall meeting came to a close, a woman from a prominent civil rights organization approached Jamal's father. She expressed her support and offered to assist with legal representation if the school failed to take appropriate action. Her involvement added further pressure on the school, signaling that this situation was now in the public eye. The following day, the school finally made a move. The principal called Jamal's father to inform him that Coach Harris had been placed on administrative leave, pending a formal investigation. While this wasn't the final step Jamal and his father had hoped for, it was a sign that their voices were being heard. News of the suspension spread quickly, and Jamal's classmates greeted him with encouragement and words of support. Leah and Carl, as always, were by his side. "This is just the beginning, Jamal," Leah said with a determined smile. "We won't stop until they make real changes." With Coach Harris suspended, the atmosphere at school began to shift. Teachers and staff, previously distant or dismissive, started approaching Jamal, offering words of apology or support. But Jamal sensed that many of them were simply afraid of the public backlash. Despite the school's attempts to smooth things over, he knew that the fight wasn't over yet. He and his friends remained vigilant, ready to keep pushing for true change. That weekend, Jamal's father organized another meeting with the school administration. This time, he brought a lawyer from the civil rights organization, along with a community representative who had taken an interest in the case. Together, they presented a list of demands to the school board. 1. A formal public apology to Jamal for the actions of Coach Harris. 2. Mandatory diversity and cultural awareness training for all school staff to prevent future incidents of discrimination. 3. Policy changes within the school, including a commitment to respect cultural and ethnic expressions among students. 4. Assurance of protection for students who choose to express their heritage and identity. The school board, faced with mounting public pressure and the risk of legal action, was forced to take these demands seriously. The principal, visibly uncomfortable, promised to review the proposed policies with the board, though he clearly hoped to resolve things quietly. Despite the progress, Jamal and his friends continued their efforts, knowing that a single suspension wouldn't bring about the lasting change they wanted. Leah, Carl, and other students organized a petition, gathering signatures from classmates, teachers, and even members of the community, urging the school to implement the policy changes as quickly as possible. With the petition in hand, Leah and Carl approached Jamal one afternoon, their eyes shining with determination. "We've got over 100 signatures already," Leah said proudly. "Everyone's on board with this. They want to see real change." Jamal looked at the list of names, feeling a swell of pride and gratitude. It was overwhelming to see how many people supported him, how many believed in the importance of this fight. His friends had gone above and beyond, transforming his personal struggle into a movement that resonated with others. In the days that followed, the story continued to gain traction. News outlets picked it up with headlines reading, "Student Fights for Cultural Identity in School Discrimination Case," and "Community Demands Accountability After Incident of Racial Bias." Jamal's story was shared on social media, with messages of support flooding in from people all over the region. The outpouring of encouragement buoyed him, giving him the strength to keep pushing forward. Finally, after weeks of mounting pressure, the school board made an announcement. In a public statement, they acknowledged the need for greater awareness and sensitivity regarding cultural expression within the school. They committed to implementing the proposed diversity and cultural awareness training for all staff, and promised to revise the school's policies to better protect students' rights to express their heritage. Jamal and his father attended the announcement, watching as the principal and members of the school board spoke. Though Jamal still harbored resentment for the humiliation he had endured, he felt a glimmer of hope. The school was finally taking responsibility, and while it didn't erase the pain of what had happened, it felt like a step toward something better. After the announcement, Jamal's father placed a hand on his shoulder, giving him a proud smile. "You did this, Jamal. You stood up, and because of that, things are going to change." Jamal nodded, a sense of relief washing over him. He knew that this journey had been about more than just standing up for himself. It had been about paving the way for others, ensuring that no one else would have to endure what he had. As they left the meeting, Leah and Carl ran over to join him, their faces lit up with excitement. "This is it, Jamal," Carl said. "We really made a difference." Leah nodded, her eyes shining with pride. "You showed them that we're stronger together, that we won't stay silent." Jamal smiled, feeling a sense of peace he hadn't felt since he'd arrived at this school. The fight had been difficult, but he knew that they had achieved something meaningful. They had transformed a moment of pain into a movement of empowerment, and now, thanks to their efforts, the school was on a path toward real, lasting change. The following school year began with a noticeable change in the air. As students filtered into the building, a new banner hung above the entrance. "Respect, diversity, and inclusion, core values of our school." The message was clear. Jamal's story had left an indelible mark, and the administration was making a visible commitment to change. Jamal walked into school on that first day, a mix of emotions swirling within him. It had been a long, difficult year, but he felt stronger and more confident now, not just because of the progress they had made, but because of the support he had gained along the way. He wore his braids with pride, knowing that his right to express his culture was now protected. As he walked through the hallways, he noticed other students glancing at him, some with nods of encouragement, others with expressions of admiration. Leah and Carl joined him, and together they headed to homeroom, exchanging smiles as they passed the new posters on the walls promoting the school's new diversity program. One poster read, "Embrace your identity, respect everyone's journey," and another showed students of different backgrounds working together. The summer had been transformative for the school. After the public outcry and the demands from Jamal's father and other community members, the school board had committed to a new diversity and cultural awareness training program for all staff. They also instituted a code of conduct that explicitly recognized and protected cultural and ethnic expressions, ensuring that no student would face the same discrimination Jamal had endured. The changes went beyond words. The administration introduced an elective course on cultural diversity, open to all students, where they could learn about different cultures, discuss experiences with bias, and explore the importance of respect. The school had also set up a peer support group led by a guidance counselor to give students a safe space to talk about their experiences and seek support. Jamal felt a sense of pride as he attended his first class of the year. He knew that these changes had come because of his journey, his struggle, and his choice to stand up against injustice. It was a bittersweet victory, but one that filled him with a quiet sense of accomplishment. One afternoon, as he was working on an assignment in the library, the school principal approached him. Jamal looked up, surprised, and saw an unexpected expression of respect on the principal's face. "Jamal," the principal began, his voice a bit hesitant, "I wanted to thank you. I know things could have been handled differently, and I realize now that we could have done more to support you. The changes we've made, they wouldn't have happened if not for your bravery." Jamal nodded, unsure of what to say. It felt strange to hear gratitude from someone who had once seemed indifferent to his struggle, but he accepted it with grace, understanding that real change often came from difficult journeys. As the semester wore on, Jamal saw the effects of the new policies in action. Students felt more comfortable expressing themselves, and he noticed more diversity in hairstyles, clothing, and traditions among his classmates. Leah and Carl became leaders in the peer support group, sharing their own experiences and encouraging others to embrace their unique identities. One day, Jamal was invited to speak in the new cultural diversity course. Standing in front of the class, he felt a rush of nerves, but also a deep sense of purpose. He shared his story with the students, talking about the importance of respecting each other's backgrounds, the pain of facing discrimination, and the strength it took to stand up for oneself. After he finished, the students applauded, and a few came up to him afterward, thanking him for his words. A younger student, a quiet girl with braids like his, approached him with a shy smile. "Thank you, Jamal," she whispered. "I used to hide my hair because I was scared people wouldn't understand. But because of you, I feel proud of it now." Jamal's heart swelled with pride and gratitude. In that moment, he knew that everything he had gone through, every tear, every moment of frustration, had been worth it. His journey had inspired others to stand up for themselves, to embrace their heritage without fear or shame. As the year drew to a close, Jamal reflected on how far he had come. The challenges he had faced had transformed him, given him a strength he hadn't known he possessed. He felt more grounded, more confident, and ready to face whatever lay ahead. One day, his teacher assigned an essay on personal growth. Jamal sat down with a sense of purpose, determined to share his story in his own words. He wrote about his experiences, about the pain and the resilience, about the importance of identity and the power of standing up for oneself. He poured his heart into the essay, capturing every detail, every lesson he had learned. When he finished, his teacher was so moved by the essay that she submitted it to the school newspaper. Soon, it was printed for the entire school to read, sparking conversations among students and teachers alike. His words touched people in ways he hadn't anticipated, becoming a source of inspiration for others. In the final weeks of the school year, Jamal realized how much he had changed, not just within the walls of the school, but also in his own mind. He felt stronger, more assured, and more connected to the people around him. And as he prepared for the next chapter of his life, he knew that he would carry these lessons with him, no matter where he went. On the last day of school, as he walked through the now familiar halls, Jamal noticed something new. Students were gathered in the courtyard talking and laughing, their diverse styles and backgrounds blending together in a vibrant tapestry. It was a small but powerful reminder of the progress they had made, of the community they had built. As he turned to leave, Leah and Carl ran up to him, their faces bright with excitement. "Jamal," Leah called, grinning, "we wanted to tell you, next year they're naming the diversity course after you, the Jamal Initiative for Cultural Awareness. It's their way of honoring everything you've done." Jamal's heart swelled, a sense of pride and gratitude filling him. He looked around at his friends, his school, the place that had once made him feel like an outsider but had now become a part of his journey. He knew that his story had left a lasting impact, and he felt ready to face whatever came next with strength, resilience, and an unwavering sense of self. As he walked out of the school for the last time that year, he looked back, feeling a sense of closure, of peace. His journey had changed not only him, but also the community around him, paving the way for others to walk proudly in their own identities. Jamal smiled, knowing that the struggle had been worth it, that he had made a difference, and as he stepped forward into his future, he knew he would continue to carry his story, his heritage, and his pride with him wherever he went. Thank you for watching to the end. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new stories. Leave comments where you're watching from and watch the next and other videos on the channel.